I do have some science fiction to recommend. In fact, I could make this a series. Today I'll start with the one book that changed me more than any other. But first, I just want to say how important this was to me growing up and how much it shifted and shaped my worldview. I read a lot of science fiction as a teenager, and it was very fundamental to the person that I became. And one other thing to note is that I had a lab job after college, which gave me a lot of free time for reading. And I printed off a ton of free fiction and science fiction and whatever that was available on the internet. And unsurprisingly, the fiction was usually not worth reading. In fact, I didn't find anything that I remember. But the science fiction was like 90%. Oh, I'm glad I read this. And it was often not good writing, but the ideas and the commentary on the future as well as the society we live on now were great ideas. That's what I really enjoy about science fiction. But for me, one book stands above all others. Here is the edition I read of Stranger in a Strange Land, and you can already tell why this book stuck in my 13-year-old brain. But it wasn't only because of the sexiness involved in this book. This book was about a religion, almost. This book by Robert Heinlein, one of the big three of science fiction writers in English of the Golden Age, was published in 1961. So it was before the 60s started at all. And it became a fundamental Bible for the 60s. It was arguably the first great science fiction book that jumped into the mainstream consciousness, including the word grok came from that, grok, to understand something. And so the idea of the book is that this young man gets stranded on Mars by an accident, and he's the first one there, and the Martians that are living there take him under their wing and teach him about his own mind, about living with the nature and the universe, how to control things through thought, which at the time I thought was fantasy, and now I actually believe is something that happens, which is an interesting twist. But this young man eventually comes back to Earth, and he is flummoxed by what Earth is for quite a long time until he finally starts to figure out what laughter means and all of this. And he has an awakening. He starts doing water brother ceremonies. Water is so important on Mars. And this actually became somewhat of an underground religion in the 60s. People started doing these ceremonies about oneness. And eventually, this young man, Michael Valentine Smith, became a prophet. And he also showed young me about polyamory for the first time and having multiple loves, and that completely shifted my worldview. I grew up in a conservative Anabaptist church, and as soon as I read about polyamory, I'm like, that made sense. I always felt it in my gut, and just reading it from him helped unlock it. So I think this is just a wonderful book, an important book in history as well. So I would recommend Stranger in a Strange Land.